Thank you, folks. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. John and Kim and everybody, thank you so much for having me here. I hope it's all going to work out. So we have 20 slides, and whenever you're ready, with no further ado. Magic is everywhere in sailing, and what better than photography, the modern memory machine, to chase the infinite variations of sail and sky and seas. Our memories are not only preserved, but also shaped by photographs, and the magic of this dynamic has been my undoing. From developing slide film in my van to computerized cameras and internet, from selling prints on the docks to the America's Cup on the far side of the world, the chase goes on. My doorway to the Cup, kind of a back door actually, but that opened right into the heart of things, was through the Argentario yard and their restorations of Olin's early designs. This brought a lot of attention to the area, and later with Luna Rossa in full swing, folks would come down from Milan to chill and recharge in the local racing. Olin and Doug were photographers too, avid photographers, so we never talked about boats, but about lenses and the digital revolution underway. I was an early convert to digital technology, at first thinking that I was going to get rich selling prints, but the move to computers changed everything on the commercial side too, obviously. Dockside sales dropped off when the first do-it-yourself wave hit, so I began dressing nicely and working for the press and commercial clients. My first big job was for the sponsor of a Solo Around the World campaign. I found my niche on the shore team as a gopher, camera in one hand, Sikaflex in the other. Here we're delivering the Open 60 from Halifax to Newport. 2 incredible days on an oversized laser doing constantly more than 20 knots. When I rejoined the boat in Tauranga, the Louis Vuitton Cup was underway in nearby Auckland, where a journalist friend of mine needed a photographer for a book he was doing on the event. So since the Cup itself was after the Open 60s left for the next leg to go to Cape Horn, I changed my flight back and moved over to Auckland for my first Cup and the biggest press center I had ever seen in my life. At this point, I'd been in New Zealand for a month and fallen completely in love with the country. I'd started vanting the idea of moving over to my family in Italy, but the racing didn't work out as I'd hoped it would. I was obviously a fan of Team New Zealand. The day Team New Zealand lost their mast, we were in the air. The boats had separated quite a bit, and the rain was blowing in through the doors of the open helicopter. So we sat down on an island to save airtime and have a coffee. Back then, it was hard to find a decent espresso, so I stayed at the heli and was fussing with my kit. When out of the drizzle came the other photographers at a run, cameras flapping, and these distraught faces. They'd seen the dismasting on the cafe's TV, and our stomachs hurt thinking of what could have been. So to the relief of my wife and daughters, I returned to Europe and the Med, abandoning plans for drastic upheavals. There were still magazines to publish it and lots of America's Cup stardust to keep the racing scene fired up. This sudden northeaster caught the boats with too much sail up, and why the lens was dry, shooting from a low and wet rib, I don't know. But here, with the Sardinian Mistral every day for a week, I had rendered a super rib that let me get right into the middle of things, as you can see. And the high-level fleet was tight and aggressive, filled with sailors back from down under. Later, when the America's Cup series of preliminary acts began here in Europe, photographers were still allowed a voice in deciding where and how close to get their images from. However, all good things come to an end. We were pushed back, and the solution suggested to us was to buy a bigger lens. But by the time the act in Nice came around, a few months later, magazines were closing left and right, so a larger lens wasn't an option for me. But in Nice, I don't know how, somewhere or other, I managed to wrangle a spot on the umpire's rib that would certainly keep me close to things, as you can see here. I had to stay firmly seated on the forward bench and was sworn to silence, though I did pop up once or twice when I couldn't help myself, but I never opened my mouth. That November in Nice, the wind only showed up early mornings or late afternoons. We had to be in the docks before dawn, but the light was wonderful and stimulating. I've since suggested to all venues to follow suit and require everyone to be ashore from 11 to 3 for a big plate of pasta. Well, maybe my umpire gambit helped me out at the next act when they let me aboard the chute from the guest spot aft. The non-skid destroyed my old leather sea boots, and the whole hull would make a huge twangy shutter bang when the runners were eased right next to my head. But being aboard a cup boat for the first time in a real gloves-off race was electrifying, and I was absolutely enthralled. The clean and precise clue work made racing such a complex machine at the highest level, seem within reach of us common mortals. I was more used to helicopter work by then, and naturally, so I started playing with the first drones. We taped empty water bottles under the struts for when things would go wrong, which they always did. It was fun, but in the end, the complexity made me feel too remote to the magic of what was going on. The chase became kind of esoteric and cold. So maybe I've been around too long, maybe I've gotten too fixed in my ways, but age has its privileges. And when I think of Giotto's famous circle, I remain convinced that you have to learn the basics, you have to master the basics before getting all artsy-fartsy. So back to the water, back in a rib, back to getting drenched and bruised like the crew of Bonafide here after a windy race. I've been chasing these visions that I have in my head for ages now, and no matter how much you plan, sometimes magic takes over and the pieces come together, but maybe in a different way than you had planned. This hailstorm, these last three images show a kind of idea of what's going on here. The hail didn't hurt too much, but just a few hundred yards away, the boats were getting laid over by a downdraft, and general havoc was endemic, but we saw none of it. Here I was recovering from a fight to get a decent rib for the weather, as my first one had a broken bilge pump and wouldn't steer. I missed half the race by then in glorious conditions. So after taking some deep breaths and counting to 10, I got back into the swing of things. That wave came out of nowhere, as did this one, with this large fife working a way out of the Bay of Saint-Tropez. So sometimes your glasses and viewfinders are so covered with salt that you only have a vague idea of what's going on the other side, which is pretty much how I feel right now after the last image of my Pecha Kucha. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.